Lake Forest podcast is supported by viewers, listeners, and businesses just like you. Michelle Parno has lived and worked in Lake Forest for over 2 decades. Michelle's lending experience, when combined with her real estate expertise, makes her an invaluable asset to her clients as they navigate their home buying or selling process. Call Michelle now at 847-528-8721, 847-528-8721. For the best cannabis in the world, look no further than Iliad Epic Grow. Owned by Lake Bluff's own Rich Ruzich, they are a cannabis cultivation center focusing on hard-to-find small batch products that will delight both the occasional user and ganjier. When visiting Michigan, ask for it by name. Epic Products, exceptional process. For more information, email info@iliadgrow.com. Laracy & Company CPAs, founded in 2010 by Lake Forest's own Brian Laracy, specializes in tax preparation and bookkeeping services. Earning the People Love Us on Yelp award, their process is straightforward. Just upload, review, and file. For a free quote, visit LaracyCPA.com now. That's LARISEYCPA.com. I'm excited to share with you something special from our Lake Forest community, the Aesthetic Lounge Med Spa, located at 775 North Bank Lane in Lake Forest near Wisconsin Avenue. This just isn't any spa. They offer an amazing blend of traditional spa services plus the added benefit of medical procedures and treatments. In a relaxing and luxurious spa environment, you can enjoy a range of cosmetic and aesthetic treatments. These are all performed under the supervision of top medical professionals. The Aesthetic Lounge Med Spa provides skin care, facial rejuvenation, body contouring, laser hair removal, Botox, dermal fillers, chemical peels, and much more. What's great is that each treatment is tailored not just to enhance your appearance, but also to address specific skin concerns and to promote overall well-being. So if you're looking to pamper yourself and take your beauty routine to the next level, give the Aesthetic Lounge Med Spa a call at 224-768-8028 or visit them at their location on North Bank Lane. It's an experience your skin will thank you for. We'd also like to say we're thankful for our Patreon supporters, Otto, John C., Helen, Herrick, and J.M. Greetings.
Good morning.
It's early.
Good morning, everyone.
Regina.
Hi, Pete. How are you?
Making friends every day. You know how it is.
That's a good thing.
That's what
Regina, pronounce your last name, because I've heard two different.
And Pete, I want to hear you say my first name properly.
Regina.
Very good. Yeah, Etherton.
And say the last name one more time, because I walked on it.
Etherton.
Etherton. Okay.
Well, Pete, thank you for having me. I really do appreciate it.
I like your artwork. What is that?
Oh, this is from Spain.
Ah.
It's an oil painting.
Got it. Yeah, I got to work on my my artwork.
I'm at home. This is my home office today, but I used to have this in my daughter's bedroom, and she said the woman looked so creepy she wanted it moved to my office.
I'm looking at the signature. Does that say Biden?
No. Oh, no.
He couldn't paint that.
Hunter? He's a big art seller.
I'm having trouble with my earpiece here.
Yeah, keep it that way. All right, Regina, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Congrats are in order, I guess. You brought you got the most money for your clients. Is that what happened? What was this award that I see here?
Oh, the Law Dragon Award?
I don't know. You got so many, you might as well list them all off here, Regina.
Okay, well, I'm not going to do that, but the one most recently was every year they select 500 of the lawyers in the United States who they feel have been the most outstanding lawyers for that particular year, and it's based on, you know, your results, your publications, everything that you do, all of your activities.
Well, take a bow.
I've been doing this a lot. I've been in this business for 41 years. I've been doing this a long time. So, you know, it's when you've been around that long, people.
You haven't learned how to take a compliment yet?
Yeah. There's so many wonderful lawyers in our community that, no, truly, Pete, there is. And when you win one of these awards, you're very grateful. But I also always want to pay homage to my peers who do similarly a wonderful job with all of their clients.
Duly noted.
So Regina, congratulations on those awards, but that's not why we have you here this morning. So, so you right now are the vice president of the Lake Forest Caucus.
Correct.
And at the annual meeting, which will be on March 18th, which is
Next week.
What day of the week is that? That's that'll be on Tuesday, between 2 p.m. and 8 p.m. at Gorton Center. People can come by and vote, and you will be the candidate for president of the Lake Forest Caucus, because that's how it works. The vice president becomes the president and stuff, but there is a vote. So let's talk about the basics of the meeting. Explain that. Also explain the postcards that people got for their ward election for caucus, because there is a difference, and I think some people get those two confused. So why don't you give us an overview of all that?
Sure. Thank you, Joe. So first of all, it's referred to as the spring meeting. The annual meeting is the fall meeting, and that is for no worries. People confuse those all the time, but that is for the purpose of voting on what would be the elected candidates, aldermen, mayor, and school board, and that occurs at the November or October annual meeting. And the reason that occurs then is because we then have to file petitions with the State Board of Elections that are due by a particular date that's set forth by the state. What's happening in the spring is, and this is traditionally, it happens every spring about the same time, is the executive officer slate is voted on. And the executive officers are chosen by the existing executive officer slate, as well as by the caucus committee itself. And they typically are people who historically have demonstrated, outstanding skills in terms of their passion for the city, their willingness to get the work done, their volunteerism. They're also people who are viewed as being objective, because in this role you have to be objective, because you have to listen to voices of all of the 43, as well as listen to the community. And so that vote is occurring on March 18th. And I want to urge everybody to come out and support this slate. This slate is a wonderful group of people, but also we don't want to run into the scenario we ran into last year with a no vote, because all that's going to do would be delay our progress on the bylaws. And
so I want to talk more. I'm sorry to cut you off.
Yeah,
I want to talk more about the possibility of a no vote in a minute, because that is out there. But just again, let's go through the logistics of the meeting. So every registered voter in Lake Forest is a member automatically of the Lake Forest Caucus. Therefore, every registered voter in Lake Forest can come to the annual meeting on Tuesday between 2 and 8 p.m. at Gorton Center and vote.
And bring your spouses, partners, and neighbors, friends, and adult children. Thank you for showing
my 18-year-old daughter, who's now a registered voter, will be there. So, they do need to bring like a driver's license or something to prove who they are.
Correct. And then we check that against the most recent voter roll that we receive from the state to ensure that the person is truly registered properly. They need to bring proof of residency, NID, something that identifies you as a resident of Lake Forest.
Generally speaking, the driver's license works, right?
Correct. You'd be amazed at the number of people who show up with no ID, and because it's Lake Forest, they just say, well, I've lived here for 40 years. Of course, here's something that shows my address, but that's not sufficient. They need an actual ID.
Okay. So they do that, and they can come in anytime between 2 and 8. And then the ballot. Tell us how the ballot works in terms of how you vote.
Sure. The ballot is going to be a yes/no vote for the slate as a slate. So you will be voting on the executive committee as a slate. And the reason for that is that this is a team. And this is a team that is selected as a team. Each of these people has specific skill sets that qualify them to do these positions. And so it's important for the team to function well, for it to be a cohesive group. And this group, I can tell you, I've been on the caucus for 4 years, is a phenomenal group of people.
And it's an all volunteer thing, right? Nobody's getting paid to do any of this.
All volunteer. And this year, just to give you an example, I've been spending approximately 20 hours a week doing this volunteer job on behalf of the city of Lake Forest.
Wow. So that's 20 billable hours you're missing as an attorney.
Yeah, I don't bill. We work on a contingency rate, but it's still time that
Sure.
I'm taking away from my practice in order to help the city of Lake Forest, which I am happy to do. If it keeps the city of Lake Forest in a good place, I am more than happy to do it.
So who else is on this slate besides you for president?
Mark Pickett for vice president. And just so that you know who Mark is, Mark has been the person who has gotten our website past the finish line. If it hadn't been for Mark, I'm not sure that we would have ever gotten a new website up and running. He's been phenomenal. He is presently the external communications guy, and you've probably noticed an increase in communications this year, and he is the one responsible for that. So he's done a stellar job. Treasurer is Armando Guzman. Armando had served as internal communications this past year. Done a really nice job with that, and so he's going to be treasurer hopefully next year. Fundraising, Peg Siebert. Peg has been on the caucus for 4 years, I believe. She served 2 years as ward chair of Ward 2. Her ward loves her, but she can only serve 2 years. So she is moving into the fundraising position. External communications, it's going to be Tyler Lisenby. Tyler's newer to the caucus, but he's in Ward 1. We tried to pick people from each of the wards so that there would be executive officers that came from each of the wards. Tyler is from Ward 1. He has stepped up every opportunity he had to help, and he's really demonstrated wonderful leadership skills. His attendance is great. Everybody loves him. So he is on the ballot for external communications. And then Viktor Brisku, who is now the present ward chair of Ward 4, is on the ballot for internal communications. Viktor was loved by his ward this year, and in fact, the ward wanted him to stay as ward chair, but he has the skills necessary for the internal communications job. So we asked him whether he would be willing to move into that.
Okay, so that's the slate, and they vote yes or no as a whole. They don't get to pick and choose yes for this person and no for that person. It's
Right.
All or nothing.
Right.
So with that basic mechanics out of the way, and you've held some open houses, I believe, and you're holding another tonight, but we record on Wednesday and the show gets posted on Saturday. So probably we've held some open houses with the caucus candidates, right? So
yeah, last year there was people had asked for more opportunity to meet the candidates ahead of the actual election so that they could get to know them. So on March 1st, we held a meet and greet at Gorton for all the executive officer slate. On March 13th, between 7 to 8, we're holding a meet and greet for the Caucus Connection ballot, the people who the community will vote as their ward representatives. And then Mark and I have done 2 presentations over the last 60 days at different organizations to introduce the executive slate to them and to let them answer any questions that they had.
you've been out there, you're talking to folks, but we do want to address the controversy of there was a op-ed written by Prue Beidler, former mayoral candidate, urging people to vote no because of apparently her frustration with the bylaws process. So let's talk about, because I know this has been a sticky issue the last few years, is the bylaws. Talk about the process and why it's not being voted on at this meeting, which is what I believe it sounds like she's upset about.
Sure. Joe, if I could just add one thing, I just want to emphasize the Caucus Connection ballots that Pete had actually held up a few minutes ago. That is an entirely different, serves an entirely different purpose than the election on March 18th. And thank you, Pete. And some people are confusing that. So I just want to clarify that that ballot that you receive in the mail is for each ward to elect what we refer to as their representatives, the people who they want to represent them on the committee in their ward. Those need to be completed and mailed. I believe they have to be postmarked by the end of March. And then they will be counted, but that has nothing to do with what's happening on on March 18th. So I just want to make sure that the community understands that, because we've been getting a lot of questions since these two.
Because people think that, oh, I mailed the postcard in, I don't need to go to Gorton on the
Exactly.
18th, and they're two separate things. And there is no, at least for now, I know that's one of the potential proposals for the bylaws change. There is no remote voting. So you either show up at Gorton between 2 and 8, or you don't get to vote, right? There's no, you can't vote by mail from out of town or any of that stuff.
Right. And actually, one of the proposals that has been talked about in the caucus this past year, which we actually talked about again last night, is consolidating these two activities so that there would be one election where you would go and vote on the executive slate as well as vote on your ward representatives, to eliminate the mailing ballot in its entirety so that people would only have to vote once.
So let's talk in general. That's one of the considerations. I think I heard there was 14 proposals. So let's talk about the bylaws, the subcommittee, all of that stuff. Let's get it all out there.
Sure. So there are actually, I believe, 15 Redline provisions that came back. And just to give a historical reference in terms of what happened, the president under the bylaws has a right to create an ad hoc committee on his own, which Joe did sometime. I think that was first originated or discussed sometime over the summer of last year.
Joe Oriti.
Joe Oriti, the current president. He saw the need and wanted to respond to the community that was asking for the bylaws to be amended because of the elections that had happened previously in the recent past, and because there being a lack of direction in terms of what to do when there was a no vote. I think the community was begging for direction. I think the caucus wanted to have, certainty with its actions, certainty in terms of what it should and should not be allowed to do. So they formed an ad hoc committee, and Joe put Melanie Rummel and Kent Novit in charge of it. And we thank Kent and Melanie both for their service. They then interviewed a whole bunch of people. I think there were over 50 people who were interviewed, who came forth, who said they wanted to serve on the committee. They then selected from that committee 7 individuals who would actually be part of the ad hoc committee. In addition to that, those who were not selected were given the option of being part of what is called as a focus group. And that would be a group that as the ad hoc committee progressed, they would have the opportunity to go to the focus group and run their suggestions or proposals by them to see what they thought, to get additional input. So that all occurred, and I believe it was starting October. So in October, November, December, all the way through January, so that's almost 4 months, this ad hoc committee was meeting on an ongoing basis. Bob Kiley was put in charge of being the actual facilitator of the meeting, so that the meeting, there would be some procedure in place for the meetings to run smoothly so that they could get through the work that they needed to get through. Because there was a lot of.
And you're talking about the former city manager, Bob Kiley, correct?
Correct. He had facilitated a lot of meetings in the past. So he was viewed as somebody who's done meetings like this before, has had to deal with the community on issues, maybe not this specific issue, but on similar issues. And so he was identified as someone who would be a good facilitator. So they created this committee. The committee started working. There were 2 instances where the committee asked Melanie, Kent, Joe, and I to appear. They had some questions and they asked us to appear for the purpose of answering questions solely. We had no idea, what recommendations they were thinking about or which direction they were going. We never had that throughout the entire process. We wanted it to be independent. We wanted them to come up with their own conclusions that weren't polluted or biased by anything that we said or did or any direction we wanted them to go in. So they completed their work in February 1st. They gave us the final version of the recommendations. That, under the schedule, that only allowed 2 weeks for us then to review, vote on, and present those to the community by February 15th, because the spring meeting is March 18th, and those would have to be presented to the community 30 days before the spring meeting. So it became an unworkable schedule for us, because in this February timeframe, we had to vet candidates for BRB, Plan, as well as ZBA. There was a total of 5 candidates that we had to secure for these boards. Those interviews were going on at this time, but in addition to that, we had 12 caucus committee members who were terming off or who had needed backfill spots filled. So we also had to interview, vet all of those candidates so that we could get the Caucus Connection ballot out on time so that the community could vote on them prior to April 1st. So all of this was going on during these 2 weeks, and it was completely impossible for the Caucus Committee to do all of the work that it needed to do in order to get this proposal out to the community. We all decided it's better to be, the quality of what we put out is better if we take our time and not do this rushed than to put something out to the community that's maybe not consistent, maybe not proper, and then end up with a scenario where we can't get a 2/3 vote. Because of the way these bylaws have been amended in the past, they have been amended by certain provisions, not by anybody going through the whole document and trying to bring consistency to it. And as a result, there are inconsistent provisions that exist now. Before we submit our recommendations to the public, we want to fix all those. And that was the reason for the attorney review.
Okay. Regina, you and I, we were on the caucus together.
We were.
5 years ago. And one of the things that I would imagine is going to be popping up in those red lines is something about conflict of interest, which came to light when I was on the caucus and doing this podcast, and I was speaking up regarding an issue of I think it was Nancy Novit at the time. So this bylaw stuff has been going on for a long time. In fact, in 2001, there's a show I put up where the bylaws were down for like 4 months. We couldn't get Kim Fail to come up. And
2021.
But some of the things that I see happening back then that are keep recurring, Regina, is number one, what was Kent Novit's and Melanie Rummel's role? What was their position defined as? What were they supposed to do? What was their duty?
And Pete, I have to apologize to you for one thing, because I would join the caucus. I was a backfill on the caucus, and I started the very first week that I didn't start in April or May or June or July. I started in September, and I started the very first week that your issues came up in the caucus. I had no idea what was going on. Nobody told me.
That didn't stop you from speaking up.
Nobody told me what was going on, and I was trying my best to figure out what is happening here, because certainly I didn't sign on for something where the very first meeting there's going to be this big fight about things that had happened the year previous that I just certainly didn't know about. Having said that, Melanie, and so I'm apologizing to you.
I accept your apology.
Oh, thank you. Melanie and Kent were put originally as chairmen of the committee. They were selected by Joe. They were put as chairmen of the committee. And I honestly believe that their purpose was to identify candidates, was to fill the positions, create the committee. And then as time progressed, once they did all that, and they did it beautifully, they interviewed all of these candidates in a very short period of time. They got a wonderful committee together. They fulfilled their responsibilities. And then I think as time progressed, it was identified that we really did need to keep this committee as independent as possible. And that was one of the reasons why Joe had saw the need to put a facilitator in charge of it.
Hold on, Regina. So why did Joe go get Melanie and Kent?
You would have to ask him that because I was not consulted as to that
Oh, come on,
decision.
Regina. You got
No,
to answer
truly.
that question.
No, truly. I think that, Kent has served on the caucus and done a wonderful job and has also served in other capacities in the community. He's well known, he's well respected. Melanie has certainly done a lot for the community.
But I mean, you're in those executive meetings. Why did we have to go out and get Novit and Rummel to come up and do anything?
Well, I think you needed somebody to be chair of this committee in order to create the committee. The committee had to be created. And so if we had created the committee, Pete, I don't think it would have been viewed as being independent.
So instead of a committee, they were brought on a recruiting basis, right? They just go hire the people and then send them on their way, or they thought they're going to be more of a part of this process because there was some flack going on. My opinion was that you brought those two people in to kind of quiet all the people that were getting rustled up every time we have a vote, so they don't vote no anymore.
Again, you'd have to ask Joe. I truly was not involved in that decision making process.
This doesn't look good. Regina, this doesn't look good because they're going out there. You saw what they did on the other podcast. They went out there and said, yeah, they used this to go pick these people, and then they shut us out. I don't know if it's the right thing or the wrong thing. I don't even think we should have got them in the first place because it just gives them more legitimizes these 5%ers out there that are causing all the problems.
Well, my observation was, I think Joe was, I kind of teased him a couple times over it. I said, if he can get peace in Lake Forest, we're going to have him work on peace in the Middle East next.
There is no peace.
I think he was trying to appease the critics, and again, Regina, this was an executive under the bylaws. The president has a right on his own or her own. In this case, it was he to create the subcommittee without any consultation or anything. So he didn't reach out to the rest of them, and that's his. And we've had Joe on, and I'm sure Joe's welcome to come back on. That said, he did reach out. He tried to appease them, and now we're at a point where they're saying they're not listening to us, and therefore someone like Prue Beidler is putting out an op-ed saying, "I'm not happy. They should have been doing these bylaws. Let's vote no." So, I'll let you.
No, there's nothing. Look, you can't appease these people. I'm sorry. There's not. We try to appease them, and it goes nowhere. And now we have all this crap that we're dealing with. We have to ask Joe why he picked those two people. All right, Regina. Second thing on the list is, do you think it's right that the caucus doesn't vote on who they want on the executive committee?
So could I just say one thing? Because I think that in creating this ad hoc committee, I think the theory behind it was to bring together as many varying interests as groups as possible, because only then would we be able to get a 2/3 vote down the line. I think that Melanie and Kent did a wonderful job of putting the committee together, and recruiting candidates. And just like us, Melanie and Kent were invited to participate in the 2 meetings that we participated in and give input. They also participated in the focus group meeting, as did we, and give input. So I don't think that they didn't serve a purpose. I think they served a good purpose, because they represent interests in this community. So I heard the podcast, and I would say in response that I commend them for the work that they did, and we thank them.
And the bylaw, you're not shutting out the proposed changes to these bylaws. You're just saying we need more time to do this.
Not at all. In fact, we have had 2 executive meetings in the past since we received these bylaws, as well as we had a caucus committee full meeting last night that was exclusively on these bylaws. Some of the recommendations the caucus likes. We're actually in favor of them. It was some of the recommendations that would completely change our calendar and our process and our policies that are of concern. And they're of concern because not only would they affect our recruiting efforts, they would affect the number of people who would want to be on the caucus, they would affect the calendar, and they would affect the quality of candidates that we could get. So we have to look at the big picture here. And we have to come up what our game plan is. Do you want me to talk about what we foresee as the game plan? So we actually discussed this going forward. And the game plan is going to be this. I asked everyone to, there were a lot of recommendations, a lot of discussions last night. Some of the thoughts and proposals that the caucus was making were actually really nice middle grounds to the few provisions that we have issues with. So I asked each of the caucus members to provide to me by April 1st any comments, any changes in the recommendations that they feel are necessary. We are then going to take all of those, circulate that as a document to our executive committee, have the executive committee go through it, determine which of the proposals or changes that the caucus committee has recommended we would like to put through to the caucus committee, meet. The caucus committee is willing to meet in April, go through those, vote on those. Then we would like to invite the ad hoc committee to a meeting of the full caucus committee where we could discuss whatever tweaks or recommendations in response to theirs we would like to see forthcoming. See if we can come to an agreement and then push those out to the community after we hold a public meeting so that the community could be heard on those proposals.
So you would hold a special meeting of the community, a special vote at Gorton to do that?
We would probably hold an interim vote. If we can get agreement, if the ad hoc committee is on board with us and we can move forward with agreed upon recommendations, then we would most likely hold an interim meeting that would allow for a vote after we had a meeting for the public so that the public could come and explain its concern.
It seems to me that the flashpoint of all this was the mayoral slating for the 23 election, so in the fall of 2022, was that Randy Tack got selected instead of Prue Beidler. But then Prue and her allies and former Senator Susan Garrett rounded people up to come to that meeting, which had up until then had been simply a perfunctory meeting, and took it over and voted no. And the caucus really didn't have any method to deal with it and went ahead and slated, and that caused the $500,000 to be spent in a mayoral election between the two sides, which had never been seen in this city before. So I think that the issue is the mayoral slating, and that's one of the provisions that is being discussed, is what to do if that situation were to arise again, or how to slate differently. Right? That's one of the big ticket
Right,
items there.
you have to understand that that provision would apply to all elected officials. So it would not only just solely apply to the mayoral election, but apply to school board and also apply to aldermen. So we have to be very cautious, because when you're talking about, as an example, putting two candidates up, we not only would have to vet additional candidates, but we would have to have the approval of whoever was the second candidate in advance, that candidate would be willing to be the second candidate in the event of a no vote. So all of this affects our calendar and our process.
Because you have a deadline to file the candidates for these elections with the state board of election, with the Lake County clerk, and that process is governed by state law and administered by the Illinois State Board of Elections. So, and people forget that we have elections every year in Lake Forest, because we have aldermen that term out in the even-numbered years, and those elections are held concurrently with the Republican and Democratic primaries in March of the even-numbered years. So you'll be slating candidates for aldermen this fall. They may be the same alderman running for re-election, but you still have to go through that process, right?
Right. And one of the things that the community doesn't understand is that we don't actually get the date from the county until sometime in July or August, in terms of when petitions are due. And that date changes. It's not a constant date. It's not the same date year after year after year. They have the right to change it. They changed it this past year and moved that date up, which is what required us to move up our annual meeting to October 31st. That only left us 2 weeks to get petitions done, signed, and on file. And we had, I believe, 8 candidates who we had to get petitions signed and filed in 2 weeks for. So you can see how compressed our calendar is. The new people come in at the old new meeting in April. We then historically have given people the summer off. Why? Many people travel.
Why? We don't have any time to take off. You know, Regina, this sounds great. And I've heard this for like years. And people are listening to this, and kind of, it's like the only people that are going to give a crap are going to be Prue's people that are going to, they're going to leave Lake Forest Place and come out and cause a stink. What is the number one issue with the bylaws? Like what needs to be corrected? Is it a vote, or is it an affirmation? Like, what is the number one thing? Because the problem, well defined, is half solved.
Sure. I think the number one issue in the minds of the people who have spoken up is,
I don't care about those people. I care about you. What do we got to do to fix this thing? Or does anything need to be fixed? Because remember, the last time these things were opened up in 2020, there was a bylaw expert the last time that opened these up and changed things, an expert. And we're in this situation now. I don't know if anybody's a bylaw expert here that's going to work this on that committee, but what is going to change? And what, if something does change, what is that number one thing?
I think the number one thing would be what to do in the event of a no vote with an elected officer. I think that's the number one change that not only does the caucus want certainty as to, because you have to understand, and I think, Pete, you understand fully because you were on the caucus, the caucus doesn't want to have uncertainty. We want to do what we want to follow the process that the community has approved. And when there is no process in place, it kind of throws us in a tailspin, because then we're left to bringing the matter to the vote of the caucus committee, bringing it to the vote of the executive committee, and making a decision.
Regina, we keep bringing up vote. When did this thing turn into a vote? Because I talk with people from decades ago that on the caucus, it wasn't a vote. It was an affirmation and raising of. When did the vote come into play? Is that the right word?
Maybe not. Maybe
Okay.
you're correct on that. Maybe it is just an affirmation of endorsed candidates, which would be maybe more appropriate terminology to some people. However you want to phrase it, It's a decision that would be made by the community on candidates that the caucus has endorsed.
Before 2022, before the mayor tact vote, that the annual meeting was I hate to use this word because it's a big word, perfunctory, routine, that it would be like the council voting to approve the minutes from the previous meeting, something that nobody ever thought about, something that was just a matter of fact that the process had taken place. It wasn't until Prue Beidler didn't get slated for the third time that it suddenly became an issue for enough folks to cause a commotion. I still say it never affected the majority of the community, but you have acknowledged that, hey, we would like to try and address this through some bylaw changes, but not rush it through in a 2-week process, like you said, right?
Yeah, this is a pretty important provision to a lot of people in the community. There are a whole bunch of people in this community who don't want to see anything changed. For every one person who wants to see it change, there are a whole bunch of people who don't want to see it
Can you
change.
speculate on a percentage?
I know that just from information we have, for every one person who wants to see recommendations like that were forthcoming from the Ad Hoc Committee, there's probably 2 on the other side that say, leave it as it is.
Well, I'll give you a percentage. Randy Tack got 60% of the vote against Prue Beidler.
Exactly. So, and that's kind of the point. We're trying to do a balancing act here that accommodates everybody's input and everybody's concerns and reaches a middle ground. And we have to figure this out. And I do think, though, that we need to figure it out, because I think that to put the caucus in the position, and this is something that has happened now over the past couple of years that's disconcerting to me, to put the caucus in the position where volunteers, your neighbors, your friends, are being criticized because they don't have direction on how to proceed in the event of a no vote. And then we all end up taking the criticism because we try to do what we believe is in the best interest of the community by moving in that particular fashion after a vote of both the executive committee and the representatives who have been elected and appointed by the community. We make the best decision we can under that scenario, and we get criticized for it. We don't want that. We want to have everybody on the same page so that there's certainty in what is happening going forward.
There's been sketchy stuff happening for quite a while, Regina, and people, they look at this stuff. Look, it may not be true, but this thing with Melanie and Kent and using them and not using them, it looks sketch. It just does. Or it wasn't defined at the beginning what their role was, or their suggestions were going to influence things that we didn't want to see. I don't know. It just adds to this. The caucus doesn't have a defined budget till somebody attacks them. Is there a way to fundraise when you don't need the money, so there's some money there to fund this stuff that keeps popping up versus having a Chinese fire drill?
Sure, and that's a good question, Pete, actually. I think historically, the caucus has simply fundraised for its immediate needs, for, its budget, its annual budget, and nothing beyond that. And we have recognized now in the past few years that going forward can't be the process. We have to fundraise in advance for the unexpected things that occur. We are actually fundraising right now because we will have to have an attorney completely review whatever recommendations are going to the public to make this document consistent. And the caucus does not want it to be somebody who is in the community, because that then raises the issue of there being a bias. We need someone who's independent.
It didn't work the last time.
Well, I know, and we're trying to do this as
continue.
independently as possible. So you are correct. We need to be more proactive on fundraising, because if we are, and we understand that we can meet whatever needs there are that are coming down the pike, as an example with the bylaws, we wouldn't have to go to the community now and say, look, we do need money. We need money to be able to have this reviewed. We will have it reviewed. We want to have it reviewed. We need to have it reviewed.
Yeah, I
Well,
think fundraising is a reality today in elections. I mean, Ms. Beidler spent, and she was perfectly entitled to under the law. She spent nearly $200,000 of her family's money to run for what is essentially a non-paid position, pays $10 a year for mayor, and the caucus then had to scramble and raise a bunch of money to compete with that. So ongoing fundraising, and I think my one suggestion would be to the caucus is to hold a small dollar fundraiser, because everyone is a member of the caucus in the city automatically. Obviously, there's some people that disagree with things and aren't ever going to want to participate in it, but hold a small dollar fundraiser where you can make some money, maybe not $200,000, but you can make some money, but people can feel like they're helping to contribute to the caucus. Use the room at Duffers or some local establishment that to keep the cost down or something. But
no, I think it's too hard. Regina, you can chop in or pop out if you want, but to me, it's like you need like a steady administrator there to keep this thing going, because when you term off, how many years you got left?
This is it.
This is it. Yeah,
my next year will be, and that is one of the, actually, Pete, if I could just interject.
Yeah, go ahead.
Two of the suggestions, because you're actually raising some really good suggestions, and I just want to respond to them. One about the administrator, it has been raised repeatedly this year that the caucus should have a part-time administrator, somebody who is responsible for some of these things we've been discussing, but also somebody who is going to be there the long term, who knows where all the documents are, who has the history on people who have come, maintains the history on people who have come before us in the past. Because what happens is when people like me, I've been on 4 years, it'll be my 5th year, when we term off, our knowledge is gone. And then what happens is we have to keep communicating, we'll have to keep communicating with future presidents so that they're aware of whatever lessons we've learned or whatever knowledge we have. It's really not the most effective system. And one of the suggestions that was on the table was to actually make the president's term longer, make it 2 years for those presidents who were willing to serve for 2 years, versus 1 year, so that we weren't losing this knowledge. I don't know that that solves the problem in its entirety. I don't think it does, but that suggestion has been out there.
What about an advisory board of past caucus presidents that would come in and something like that?
I am totally in favor of that. I think that's a wonderful suggestion. I think that those past presidents who would like to serve, I agree with you, Pete. To me, it's a no-brainer.
Well, they are, but they're just doing it from the sidelines and whispering, and we need actual leadership to come in and guide this thing, because a third of the people are new, third have been around, third are leaving, and there's no foundation there, and we're going to be kicking the can on these bylaws down. Seriously, 5 years ago, you're going to listen to the show, it's the same crap that's coming on. We got this issue with Melanie and Kent being part of this committee, because what happens if the suggestions that are made, you guys don't take any of the suggestions? Then we're in a whole bowl of mess. But I do want to get back to my earlier question. Shouldn't the caucus vote on who they want their president to be, or to go on the executive committee? Regina, you pick whoever you want, and then whoever the vice president is, that's automatically the president. Whether you're a positive force or a negative force, it's hard to change this thing if you get to pick all the players for the coming year. You got a thought?
Sure. So first of all, the people who end up as president are not randomly chosen, and are not chosen exclusively by the person that precedes them. There is actually a process that goes into selecting who the vice president, who all the executive
Yeah, what
officers
is the process?
So the process is first, and I did this process actually this past year, October and November, I had sent around emails to the entire caucus committee asking them who would like to be considered for the executive committee, and for what position would you like to be considered as an officer for. This was before the officer slate was even formulated. And I said, the requirements are you have to have the time You have to have the skill set for whatever particular position you want to apply for. And you have to have the willingness to actually do the work. Do you know how many people responded?
Very little, I'm guessing.
Three. Three people responded, and each of those people were actually given executive officer positions. I then went to individuals who I thought would be very good on the executive committee, specifically on the caucus, and asked them why they didn't send me an email inquiring about a position. And I routinely got, because of their jobs, they traveled, they didn't have the extra time, they couldn't make the commitment. So we go to the caucus first as a whole and ask who wants to serve in an executive officer capacity. We then have to choose from the people who step forward unless we're able to talk other people into doing it. And I actually did talk some other people into stepping up after I gave more of an explanation as to what those roles require. The executive committee then chooses from those people who step forward, if more than one person steps forward for a particular position. We also ask the caucus committee as a whole who they want to see as their next person, as their next
Is this
president.
process like written down anywhere?
It's not written down anywhere, but this is the process we followed this past year. And it's the process that since I've been on.
So when you leave, this process goes with you.
No, this process is
Conceivably.
No, because like Joe followed the same process, and Chris before him followed the same process. It's not written anywhere, but you don't want to have a president leading the caucus who people don't want to be leading it.
But you're working with, for like a 3-year cycle, your replacement, right? Your replacements. I mean, in other words, it's kind of like high school, right? So Pete at Lane Tech High School, where Pete went, when he was a senior, there were freshmen, and they passed on to all the Lane Tech traditions. And then 4 years later, 3 years later, those kids are now the seniors, passing it on to the freshmen. So we could go from Pete's class back in 1980, whatever, to the Lane Tech class today, and they're probably totally different kids, but they got passed down through the years, the traditions of Lane Tech or Lake Forest High School or whatever high school it is. I just picked Lane Tech because it's Pete's school, but so it's kind of like that. And I think Pete brings up some good points about that, the stability and stuff like that. Now, the flip of that is, I think the beauty of Lake Forest is that everything is term limited, because I've seen in other communities where they don't have term limits, and you have somebody who becomes like the godfather, the power broker of a town, and they're there for 25, 30 years, and good government goes by the wayside, and it becomes, because the finished product here is, the end game is good city government. And I think we've got great city government in that. And so for 90 years, the caucus has been able to deliver pretty good city government to people, right? It's stayed nonpartisan. It has stayed apolitical. It's not a patronage system like some other cities around us are. So and the term limits is a big part of that. That said, maybe there is some tweaking that you can do.
Tweaking? I'm talking about writing this stuff down, Joe. There's nothing written down. So we're playing a telephone game.
How did it work? How did it work for 90 years until the caucus didn't slate Prue 3 times?
I don't know when the iPhone came out, because that changed a hell of a lot of things in comparison.
In fairness, though, to Pete's comment, I kind of agree with you, Pete. I think that if there would be some policies that said exactly what I just defined for you, that said this is the process that should be followed, or this is the recommended process to follow for selecting your next leader, maybe we're all doing it over the years and it's just happening, even though it's an unwritten rule. It would be nice to have it in writing.
Thank you, Regina, because the number 2 point that I'd like us to address is conflict of interest. And I don't know where that is on your priority list there, but I forgot that guy. Oh, no, I didn't forget his name, Aruka. He got tossed, right? Or asked to leave? Phil Aruka?
Um,
Oh, wait, here we go. Lawyer E's coming.
So you recognize we are not allowed to discuss what happens in specific meetings, but he
We
did
can't
not
discuss what's on
complete,
public Facebook pages.
he did not complete, I can say he did not complete his term as, he did not complete his designated term.
Well, he came out and spoke against the caucus, and they were using that conflict of interest role on him, just like they were trying to use it on me.
It's not really a in the case of Aruka, it wasn't really a conflict of interest. I don't think you can serve on the caucus and endorse the candidate who's running against the caucus slated candidate. That's my opinion.
Or running a fundraiser in your basement.
Yeah, whatever he did. That would be like a member of one party endorsing a member of the other party. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, Regina, is that an issue, conflict of interest? If it is, tell me why it's a big issue.
Okay, so I think we're kind of talking about two separate things here, but in the Phil Aruka scenario, when you become a caucus member and it's like being on any board. As a caucus member, once the caucus member meets and decides upon a particular candidate, just like when you meet on, if you're part of a board and you decide on a particular person for that board, the whole caucus has to get behind that candidate. That's the whole purpose of us. We're a group. We endorse a candidate as a group. We don't endorse candidates as individuals. But when an individual starts speaking against that endorsement out in the community, against the caucus and that endorsement in the community, it raises a problem because you are not supporting the very organization that you promised you would support. So that's one issue. The conflict of interest, though, provision goes well beyond that. It affects anybody who would have any dealing with the city, dealing with the community that would in any way, shape, or form impact what we are doing on the caucus. And several corporate people who have been on the caucus have said, if you guys institute something like this, we could not either be on it or participate or have participated in it. I think that that could be a problem, but I
heard that like anybody that works for Abbott, and there's a lot of Abbott employees in this that live in Lake Forest who have a lot to offer to the community, but because Abbott has an office building in Lake Forest, they would be precluded under that strict of a conflict of interest clause. I heard that.
Well, I mean, I guess the argument could be made that if we're vetting candidates for building review or ZBA or plan that have to do with, development in the downtown area, that could potentially impact Abbott. I mean, that's just a really sort of a far-fetched maybe example, but somebody brought the example to me. I'm a litigator. I try multi-million-dollar personal injury cases. What happens if one of my clients lives in Lake Forest? Do I then automatically have a conflict of interest if I'm representing a client who lives in Lake Forest who may have had some interaction negatively or positively, who knows, with the city of Lake Forest? You could find all these examples where it potentially could be a problem. And so you don't want to, by a conflict of interest provision, eliminate people from serving because of their occupations, because of their businesses, because of their whatever. What you do want to eliminate is people who cannot be unbiased and unobjective because of any of those.
Okay, that's where I'm going with it, because it's not so much bringing people on, it's the current people that you have on and the conflict of interest. I'll give you another example. Viktor, I forgot his last name, Cell Tower Viktor, okay? What's good for the community is to have people stop sponging off of my cell tower in Ward 1. And what could help, what's so funny, Joe? Cell service still sucks.
I know where you're going.
What can help the community is putting a cell tower over in, what was it, 4 or 3?
Ward 4.
Ward 4, okay. Put the cell tower up.
West Metro Station.
Okay. Now, that is something that is good for the community, and it can be, I didn't take a poll on this, Regina, but I just know that when I try to make a phone call, it doesn't go through like it could if there was another cell phone tower. To me, I think that's a greater good for the community. Is it a conflict of interest for somebody that lives in that ward to say, you know what, I don't want that cell phone tower there to be a member of the caucus to come up and to denounce it in a public meeting?
I think that's one of the, Pete, I think you're highlighting and pointing out one of the issues when these things are not defined.
Yeah,
When when there is no written policy. And I think that if you're going to hold people to a particular standard, you need to have a written policy so that there's consistency in application, so that people can direct their behavior in a manner that complies with it or decide to resign. And so there's not this question in people's minds, are they doing something inappropriate without any written direction on what that activity should or should not be? So I agree with you that there should be something in writing. I am just concerned about making it so broad that we are going to eliminate wonderful people serving in this community.
We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, in other words. So
yeah, we need volunteers. We don't want to make our pool even smaller. We want to expand our pool. And the more roadblocks you put up to people serving, the fewer people you're going to get who are willing to serve. I do think a conflict of interest provision of some sort is a good idea to have as a matter of policy for the caucus, but I don't think it should be just this broad, anything under the sun.
But they talk about agenda, Regina. Is that the same thing, conflict of interest and agenda?
I think agenda plays into conflict of interest. I think if you have an agenda,
I'm confused.
if you have demonstrated in the community for one thing or another that you have spoken out, written out, that you are clearly behind, that is public knowledge, I think that's one thing that should be considered in terms of whether you can be objective and unbiased. Because you certainly can't be in a leadership role with the caucus if you're not unbiased. It's just not going to happen.
These policies, would this be part of the bylaws or is this something separate?
I think it should be something separate. It could be referenced within the bylaws that it exists, but I think that the caucus would have to come up with a separate document with the policies. And I also like your previous idea, Pete, to have in the policy also.
But this is something to the greater issue, and this is to address some of the things that Melanie Rummel and Prue Beidler and that group have been saying. You're willing to talk about this. You just didn't want to rush it through a 2-week process, right? You're willing to have an open discussion.
Yes, my goal is to get this bylaws thing to the public. My goal is to get a vote on whatever the caucus approves to be disseminated to the public for a vote. I want to get something, though, that is acceptable to a broad spectrum of people so that we can get the 2/3 vote. To go through all of this work and not get it through because 2/3 of the people, or less than 2/3 of the people, are not in favor of it for one reason or another would put us back to square one. And how many times are we going to go through this process and try to get it approved? So my goal, though, is to get something that's right, that there is a good chance we can get the 2/3 of the community out to approve it. Not just specific interest groups, the community at large.
Regina, the policy intrigues me now because that works on getting us better. Look, we're doing a podcast here, so if you guys don't fix anything, I got a bunch of content for like ever. So maybe I have a conflict of interest here, but if you're leaving, like we didn't have the time to do it. I'm sorry, that doesn't fly. This crap's been going on for decades, or at least 5 years that I know of, and I don't know how long it takes to correct certain things. But just dropping it into ChatGPT without any context at all, it gives various things to work on. One of them is, what are the consequences of a no vote? So now we have this technology. How long will it take to get these policies in order? Like, what is the function of the caucus? Okay, interview, vet people, but how do they do that in the role? For instance, we're putting people in that have no interviewing skills, yet they're going in and asking people, how did they prepare for the meeting.
Okay, so what's the question, Pete? I'm not sure what the question is.
Is putting a policy together, is that more important than the bylaws?
No, I think I think there needs to be some limited policies in place, but I think it has to be hand in hand with the bylaws. I don't think you can add policy without amending the bylaws, because as an example, if there's not a reference to a conflict of interest provision in the bylaws, then what's the purpose of the conflict of interest provision policy?
I'd be more happy, Regina, if somebody new comes on and says, hey, you're a member of the caucus. Here are your duties. Here's what you're supposed to do. Here you go. I've heard that there's these binders that exist somewhere back when I was on the caucus. I don't know if you found them yet.
The priority right now is getting the bylaws through, the amendments in some form or fashion through. That is the priority right now.
If that's a priority, then all I'm saying, Regina, running out of time here, and I'd love to have you on again. Regina, is there anything that's stopping you from just putting a suggested manual for policies to run the caucus for this year coming up?
I don't think any one person has the right to do that. I think those have to be approved by the caucus committee, and by the executive committee.
There's authority and influence, and you're speaking to authority. I'm talking about influence as the president. Say this is the suggested. Right now, there isn't anything other than the telephone game. And to me, one is greater than zero. Is it possible to put something together and say, here's a framework that what should be going forward? Because I'm going to guess you're going to pick your vice president, who's going to be the next president. Maybe they can carry your baton forward.
Well, they already have, the vice president is on the slate. It's Mark. So.
Well, we'll see if it gets approved.
I mean,
look, we could go through this thing again. Look, Joe, you weren't around. Scu and I have already. Regina, you weren't. Well, Regina, you were sort of there in your first week when you saw what happened. Look, I've seen this thing, and this is great for a podcast. I'm just looking for an end game, and I don't want Lake Forest to turn into Highland Park. That's all. Prue wants this to be Highland Park. I don't want it to be Highland Park. That's Pete Jansen saying that, not Joe or Regina.
I don't want to be Highland Park either.
That, Pete, I just hope that you understand that getting the bylaws amended will be a huge step in the right direction. And I truly hope that we can do that. It's not just up to us, though. We've got to have the community support for what occurs. And 2/3 is it's a high vote to me.
That's a higher percentage than you need to be slated for mayor, right?
Yeah.
2/3.
Well, it doesn't matter. That's what it is. They have the ability to get people out of Lake Forest Place to come out and cause problems. And right now we're
well, it's easier to get a no vote than a yes vote, because all you need with a no vote is 33% or whatever, and you've won. I think that Joe Oriti's attempt was to try and get a process that would result in a 2/3 vote, and that process can still continue. But Regina is saying that it's not a good idea to rush it for this particular meeting, right?
Wait, when you say rush, like how long could we have been working on this?
Well, you have to, Pete, the Ad Hoc Committee had since October. They had October, November, December, January. We had 2 weeks. So they worked on this for 4 months. We literally had 2 weeks to do a thorough review, to ostensibly have.
Then why don't we have them meet 1 month less and then give you guys more time to work on it? Or that's not possible?
Well, the caucus didn't determine the schedule.
What?
Remember also, everyone doing this is a volunteer, right? So it's not like this is your job from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, to do this. You're doing this during your volunteer hours. So the process naturally will take longer. And
Coming
I
from a
think there's
guy
an
who works in
agreement that the
government.
bylaws should be amended to some of these things. The question is which things, and to hash it all out. And I think that's what they're trying to do. The other side is portraying it, the transparency folks are trying to portray it as that they've been had, they were used.
Yeah, we're feeding it to
and
them.
that's just not true. That's just BS.
No, I can assure you the process is ongoing. It hasn't been stalled. It hasn't been stopped. It's simply, we have to do what we need to do in order to get a document out there that we believe the community can get behind. And that's all we're trying to do. We're trying to get the best possible document out there to give the best opportunity for the caucus or for the community to approve this by a 2/3 vote.
And unfortunately, the optics that are out there right now.
The optics to me are that Prue Beidler is still bitter that she was not slated 3 times by the caucus. That's my opinion. That's not
I'm
Regina.
talking about Novit.
Everyone else is, and therefore.
Rummel.
The caucus worked fine for 90 years until they didn't slate Prue. So boohoo Prue is still complaining about all this. And I don't know what can make
you can't make any of them happy.
Making her the
Ignore
mayor.
them.
Ignore
them. The way the bylaws are, nobody can do anything, Regina, and just carry on and tell them to shut the hell up,
right.
move up, and do the job. That's my non-lawyer.
Well, now you got 2 of the 16,000 voters' opinions to hear, Regina. So good luck getting anything to 2/3.
Who's the next president going to be?
Mark Pickett.
Mark Pickett.
Well, we'll see after the election. Hopefully we
have to have the election.
Vote.
So, all right, just to wrap up, because we're at over an hour here. So the election is on the 18th, which again is Tuesday evening.
And that's separate from this. Don't be
separate from that. So return your postcard, mail your postcard. I couldn't hold mine up because I already returned it. And
I'm out of town next week. What do I do?
Oh, right.
Are you really out of town?
Yeah, I'm out of town next week. What do I do?
All right. Well, that's one less vote.
Oh, there's no way. That would be something.
You have to have a bylaw change, Pete. You have to have a bylaw change to do that. And even if they were voting on the bylaws this meeting, which is what Prue and company wanted, it wouldn't have taken effect for this meeting. So I think there's a consensus that they should have some type of remote voting option. But that said, they have to work. That has to go through part of the process. That's one of the 15 or whatever number of proposals there are. So, but those of us who will be in town next week, show up to Gorton between 2 and 8 p.m., right? With your ID.
Right. Thank you.
And I'm voting yes for the record.
Thank you. It's fun as usual.
Yes, thank you, Pete. I thank you.
Thanks, Regina.
The Lake Forest Podcast is supported by viewers, listeners, and businesses just like you. Michelle Parno has lived and worked in Lake Forest for over 2 decades. Michelle's lending experience, when combined with her real estate expertise, makes her an invaluable asset to her clients as they navigate their home buying or selling process. Call Michelle now at 847-528-8721, 847-528-8721. For the best cannabis in the world, look no further than Iliad Epic Grow. Owned by Lake Bluff's own Rich Ruzich, they are a cannabis cultivation center focusing on hard-to-find small batch products that will delight both the occasional user and ganjier. When visiting Michigan, ask for it by name. Epic Products, exceptional process. For more information, email info@iliadgrow.com. Laracy & Company CPAs, founded in 2010 by Lake Forest's own Brian Laracy, specializes in tax preparation and bookkeeping services. Earning the People Love Us on Yelp award, their process is straightforward. Just upload, review, and file. For a free quote, visit LaracyCPA.com now. That's LARISEYCPA.com. I'm excited to share with you something special from our Lake Forest community, the Aesthetic Lounge Med Spa located at 775 North Bank Lane in Lake Forest near Wisconsin Avenue. This just isn't any spa. They offer an amazing blend of traditional spa services plus the added benefit of medical procedures and treatments. In a relaxing and luxurious spa environment, you can enjoy a range of cosmetic and aesthetic treatments. These are all performed under the supervision of top medical professionals. The Aesthetic Lounge Med Spa provides skin care, facial rejuvenation, body contouring, laser hair removal, Botox, dermal fillers, chemical peels, and much more. What's great is that each treatment is tailored not just to enhance your appearance, but also to address specific skin concerns and to promote overall well-being. So if you're looking to pamper yourself and take your beauty routine to the next level, give the Aesthetic Lounge Med Spa a call at 224-768-8028 or visit them at their location on North Bank Lane. It's an experience your skin will thank you for. We'd also like to say we're thankful for our Patreon supporters, Otto, John C., Helen, Herrick, J.M., and Paul G.